Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome to the America's Founding Series on the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Professor Nick Giordano. I am glad you could join me. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, share this episode with your family and friends because I want to tell the remarkable story of a forgotten patriot. Because what if one of America's most effective revolutionaries wasn't a general or a statesman? What if it was an enslaved man living under the constant threat of death, risking everything for a country that didn't even recognize him as a citizen yet? And the year is 1781. The American Revolutionary War is in full swing. It's grinding into its final desperate stages, and desperation hangs heavy in the air. Uncertainty reigns, and this fledgling nation's fate is hanging by a thread. In the shadows, away from the grand battlefields and the pronouncements of statesmen, the true war of intelligence was being fought. And in Virginia, a forgotten patriot was about to step onto the stage. Now, today, we are going to delve into the extraordinary, courageous, and deeply ironic story of James Armistead Lafayette, a man who risked everything for a country that didn't recognize him because he was a slave. However, his cunning deception played a pivotal, unseen role in winning the American Revolution and thereby granting us our independence. His story is one of identity and courage, the winding road toward freedom that he helped secure for others before his own. It really is amazing. And this is what makes America such an exceptional nation. This is why when you see the people out there pushing anti-Americanism, it's really aggravating because they know so little about our history. And they'll say, well, James Armistead was never recognized because America's racist. And that is not true. James Armistead was recognized at the time, and his name was lost in history. He was born into a world of forced labor and injustice. He arrived on William Armistead's Virginia plantation around 1748. Now imagine growing up in a place where your very existence was defined by the will of another, where your days were dictated by the sun and the demands of the fields, with little hope for self-determination. But by the 1780s, things were already beginning to change. Now, Virginia had the largest enslaved population of any colony, and James was just one among the many. However, he possessed an intelligence and a quiet resolve. He also had a deep-seated desire for liberty that set him apart from other people. The grinding gears of war, however, did offer him an unexpected and dangerous window of opportunity. In 1781, British forces under the formidable Lord Cornwallis, they were entrenched in Virginia, their redcoats casting a long shadow across the land. He wanted to end the revolution. He was tired of these Americans causing trouble for the British authorities. And the Americans were desperate for an edge. They urgently needed inside information. What was going on in the ranks of the British military? What were the troop movements like? The supply lines, the battle plans. This was a war of wits as much as it was of muskets. And then you had this young French general, passionate idealist fighting for the American cause, arriving on the scene, Marquis de Lafayette. Now, Lafayette was an aristocrat, foreign-born. However, he was deeply and profoundly committed to the concept of liberty, not just abstract liberty for a nation, but a real-world application of liberty. He actually saw slavery as a profound contradiction to the very ideals that we were fighting for, and this was crucial. Lafayette, just 23 at the time, had witnessed tyranny firsthand in France, and the contradiction between America's ideals and its institution of slavery did trouble him. His commitment was a moral commitment. And when he met James Armistead, he saw a man who embodied those very ideals. Lafayette was actively seeking intelligence, and in Virginia, he encountered James Armistead. James, with a quiet determination, volunteered to assist the Americans, and Lafayette saw something in him that others might have overlooked. James Armistead had a calm presence. He had a sharp mind and a genuine desire to serve And it wasn't based on desperation because he was slave. It was based on principle. Of all the people Lafayette could have chosen, he placed his trust in James for a highly sensitive, incredibly dangerous role. He didn't see James as a piece of property, he saw him as a patriot. And with Lafayette's unwavering support, James gained a rare, perilous permission from the Virginia legislature to operate behind enemy lines as a double agent. This was no small feat. James's mission was extraordinarily dangerous. He had to infiltrate Cornwallis's camp, and he posed as a runaway slave that was seeking refuge with the British. He claimed to be eager to help them against his former slave masters. And this was the art of deception at its most dangerous. James cunningly wove himself into their trust. He wasn't just a face in the crowd. He moved within their inner circles, serving British officers directly and often overhearing discussions about troop strength, about supply lines, about the planned maneuvers. He would then skillfully relay this vital intelligence back to Lafayette while simultaneously planning deceptive information among the British, misinformation. You know, we talk a lot about misinformation and disinformation. This was intentional. He wanted to create a distorted picture of Americans' capabilities. So his intelligence became a cornerstone of the American and French strategies and played a direct role in the encirclement of Cornwallis at the Battle of Yorktown. And just to give you an example, James was instrumental in deceiving Cornwallis, leading the British general to believe that American forces were weaker and were positioned elsewhere than they truly were. Now, his reports allowed Lafayette to understand Cornwallis's true intentions. He allowed Lafayette to plan around the British movements, help set the stage for the combined American and French forces that would surround and besiege Yorktown. And the trap closed in on Cornwallis, thanks in no small part to the invisible but incredibly risky work of James Armistead. So what comes next? Now that James had helped to free a nation, what's going to happen with his own freedom? The battle for liberty for James wasn't over. It was actually just starting. If you're captivated by the hidden history that many people are completely unaware of, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and share this story with your family and friends. You know, check out our past episodes wherever you get your podcasts, because we need to understand where we come from, the founding of this country, the ideals of America, and what helped shape the American identity. So when we go back to the American Revolution, the war finally ends. The British surrender at Yorktown. America is going to be a free nation, a nation born of the very ideals that James had fought for. Yet for Armistead, the man who risked his life, outsmarted the British, provided intelligence that helped turn the tide of the war, he's going to remain enslaved. For 6 long years after helping secure a new nation's freedom, his own freedom is going to remain elusive. And this was a disgrace, right? I mean, it's profound. The bitter irony of a newly independent United States, but under Virginia law at the time, slaves could only be emancipated through a special act of the legislature. And for his unique service, James was in a very peculiar situation. The very laws that allowed emancipation for military service only applied to those who had fought with the army. Well, James's service didn't fit that official definition because he hadn't fought on the battlefield in uniform for the Continental Army. His role, which was essential, was invisible by design, and technically, he actually had served the enemy. And that was a legal gray zone that almost cost him everything. But see, General Lafayette, he wasn't going to allow this to happen. The young Frenchman who had seen James for who he truly was, for his service to the country, would not forget him. And he was shocked by this injustice. Lafayette penned a powerful and personal letter to the Virginia General Assembly on James's behalf, where he wrote, quote, "This is to certify that the bearer by the name of James has done essential services to me while I had the honor of command in this state. His intelligence from the enemy's camp were industriously collected and most faithfully delivered. He perfectly acquitted himself with some important commissions I gave him and appears to me entitled to every reward his situation can admit of," end quote. This was a direct, unequivocal testimony from one of the war's most respected generals. Lafayette didn't just advocate. He commanded respect, and his words carried immense weight. In 1786, the Virginia General Assembly finally passed an act granting James Armistead his freedom. And understand, this wasn't charity. James's freedom was earned. It wasn't given. It was the culmination of his perilous service and Lafayette's steadfast advocacy. And as a profound gesture of gratitude and respect, James decided to adopt Lafayette as his surname, honoring the man who had fought alongside him on and off the battlefield for the very liberty he now possessed. See, James Armistead lived a unique life. He ended up settling down as a free man. He was able to acquire land, start a farm, raise a family, and lived out his days in peace. What this symbolizes, James, he's the embodiment of American resilience and perseverance. Years later, 1824, Lafayette's going to return to America for a celebrated tour, and now the elderly James Armistead Lafayette, by then a prosperous farmer, traveled to meet him. And they found each other in the crowd, and in a moment that transcended race, class, or history, the great French general publicly embraced the formerly enslaved man who had been his spy. It was a powerful moment. It was a moving testament to their shared history, the mutual respect they had for each other, and the profound debt the new nation owed to its hidden heroes. James Armistead Lafayette's story reminds all of us that the American Revolution wasn't just won by generals and soldiers on grand battlefields. It wasn't just eloquent statesmen drafting documents. It was won by the countless individuals who risked everything, often without the promise of anything in return. It was won by those like James, patriots in the shadows, whose courage propelled them to acts of incredible bravery, and their unwavering belief in liberty changed history. And they never asked for a thing. They didn't ask to be remembered in the echelons of history. But James's life, from an enslaved spy to a respected free man, is an acknowledgement of the promise of liberty in America, a promise that we should always strive for. It was also a testament to the extraordinary individuals who, against all odds, believed in the promise of the United States, who helped lay the foundations for a nation, build the American identity. This is what unites us. You know, we focus a lot out there on the divisions that exist within our society. What people don't understand, when it comes to politics, there's always division in a free society. There's no such thing as unity. When you get to think for yourself, when you get to exercise your liberty, there's always going to be division and conflict that exists. But what has made the United States successful, what has brought us together as a nation, is the unique history that we have, is our belief in the American system and the American identity, is a recognition that while our history is flawed, it's still exceptional. People from all walks of life, all over the world, are going to come here to try and achieve the American dream. There's no other nation like this. And when we understand our history, that's when we have unity. For far too long, we have ignored great patriots like James Armistead, not because of racism, but simply because it's impossible to acknowledge every single person that has played a role in the American system. There are countless stories. That's why I do the America's Founding series. And James Armistead Lafayette's story should be a beacon, a reminder to not just see the figures that we constantly talk about, the Thomas Jeffersons and George Washingtons, Benjamin Franklin's, John Adams, but a reminder to look beyond those celebrated figures, to honor the hidden heroes, to give them their due, the heroes whose contributions shaped the America we know today. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please take 30 seconds to write a good review on any podcast platform that allows it, particularly Apple Podcasts, for discoverability purposes, and give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Also, share this episode with your family and friends. You know, next week is going to be Independence Week, not just Independence Day. It will be Independence Week. And you're going to want to tune in. I got some great episodes lined up for you. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back next week with more great episodes.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.